Chris thought it was a great idea as well, and then I think they rounded William to come up as well. He really didn't want to miss out on all the fun. But Kylie's done an amazing job. She has been responsible for driving the publicity, writing articles, and rounding up the media. She's done a great job, and we're very grateful. Thanks. Now, Joan, most of you know Joan. She's been bubbling around for very many years, nearly as long as I've been here. And I just want to thank her for all her energy and enthusiasm that has gone into tonight. And she has encouraged people to come along, and she has once again made her beautiful, what she calls her wee sandwiches, which are quite scrummy, and she got her sister Millie to help her out for tonight as well. So thanks again, Joni. Now, a very big thank you also to the Bairnsdale Motel. Now, this is an amazing example of how people in business in a small town, and I dare say it happens in the city as well, when people get together to support each other in hope of promoting the area. And the Bairnsdale Motel have very generously provided rooms for our audience tonight, and we're very, very grateful for that. Many thanks to Elizabeth. They run a great business, and I'm sure that if you have anyone coming up to visit the area, that they'll be well looked after there. The Bairnsdale Motel, which is out along the Lucknow Road.
Oh yeah, the new one.
The new one, yes, that new one. Let's make sure that I haven't forgotten anybody. Okay, now I'll hand over to Kylie. Many thanks, enjoy your evening.
I'm Kylie Miller, and I'm a bit nervous, so I'm going to read. This is not the normal sort of way that I spend a Saturday evening.
Put it up to your mouth.
Okay. I also don't talk very often into a microphone. I'm Kylie Miller, and these are my friends. And on behalf of us all, I'd really like to thank you all for coming, and I'd particularly like to thank Diane Duncan for hosting this event. One of my friends who works in the publishing industry saw on Facebook today that I posted a photo of Di at the bookshop with the display, and he actually wrote, "Every country town needs a bookshop run by Diane Duncan." And thank you too to all of our friends and families, many of whom have travelled long distances to be here tonight. We really appreciate that. It's makes it all extra special, I think. People have asked over the past few weeks how we've managed to get all of these wonderful authors to East Gippsland, and I think there are a few reasons, but in the end it was actually quite easy, and it actually, although it was a bit of work, it came together pretty well. I think there are a few reasons that they came. Writing a book can be pretty isolating and is often a labour of love. Each of the writers, I think, welcome the chance to meet some of their readers, to meet you, and also to speak about their work and the process of creating it, because it's not something that a lot of writers actually get to do as often as we might think that they do. I'm sure the fact that the event was set in a beautiful corner of the world was appealing as well, and I'd like to think that at the very least we will see them all back here again for a visit. I think this is also a small part of my cunning plan to entice my friends to move to East Gippsland. I'm sure Carly McCaskill from East Gippsland Marketing, who has helped with the publicity, will be grateful for that. In some cases, the authors have also relished the chance to spend time with each other, and of course it's a great opportunity to sell books. And when you've spent years writing a book, every book sale makes a difference. So I hope you're all here to buy books, and at the end of the event all of the authors will be available to sign them, and if you wish that to be the case, obviously if you wish to sell it again in a second-hand bookshop or something. I think they've also come, some of them, because I've got secrets. I've known them all for quite a long time. A long time ago, one of the authors here learned to tie a bow tie on my thigh before a black tie first date with a very elegant woman. He wasn't as sure that he was as elegant as she was. He's been very happily married to the same woman for nearly 20 years, so we obviously got it right on that night. I like to think his bow tie played a small role. I also had the strong visual of another of our authors wearing full makeup and a pink spotted shower cap the second time I met him in public. At the time, I chose not to publish the pictures. And then, of course, there are the photos of the bad 80 perms. 80s perms, you get the idea. But in the end, I think the event came together in the most contemporary of ways through social media. Each time one of my friends released a book, I'd come into Collins, and if it wasn't in stock, I'd order it. And as soon as it arrived, I'd rearrange all the shelves at the front to put my friend's book front and centre, take a photo, post it on Facebook and share it with the world in the hope that other people might buy books, because I do know that it is a labour of love and selling books is what it's all about. Earlier this year, we were sort of in the position where all 6 of them had books on the shelves at once, and I posted a photo on Facebook and they started to chat among themselves on social media about possibly taking the advantage of this opportunity to come up and visit. I think it was Belinda and Nick actually initiated in the first instance, and I said to Belinda, we've got a brilliant bookshop in Bairnsdale, you should take the opportunity and give Di a call, and if there's anything I can do to help, I will. Belinda rang Di, and then all of a sudden this happened. It all kind of just fell into place. But once again, thank you for coming. We all really appreciate it. The theme of the evening is when fact meets fiction, and I think we probably chose this theme really because there is fact and fiction in all of the books that my friends write, and probably in all of the books that most authors write. I'm sort of in the position of knowing how much fact and how much fiction is in some of the books, because they might argue that it's one or the other, and I know a little differently. And on that note, we might start with Chris Ullman, who at the end of last year, or mid-last year, released a book about politics in Canberra. Some of you might know Chris as a journalist with the 7:30 program. I've known him for 25 years, I think.
It's yours.
Chris first worked in a Catholic seminary, then as a storeman and as a packer and security guard before coming to journalism late. He was a 29-year-old copy kid at the Canberra Times in 1989 and sort of fell into journalism. And obviously since then he's worked in senior roles in pretty much all media. The Marmalade Files is his first novel, and it's set in the murky underbelly of Canberra politics. He wrote it with Steve Lewis, who is a friend and co-author, obviously, also a journalist for News Limited. Chris, there are a lot of people who have read your book and wondered actually how much of the fiction is fact. There are some, for those who've read it, there are some characters in there that bear just a passing resemblance to people in politics, current times. Can you comment or can you talk about that?
A lot of people are under this impression that it's all fiction. I know that because we had 2 lawyers go over it. And at the outset there were 14 people, we made a list of 14 people who might for some reason misinterpret that they were in the book.
Can you name the 14?
Well, some of the characters, I mean, again, one of the central characters, for example, is a foreign minister, former Prime Minister with a dicky heart who has a stroke on Lateline. She is not like anyone you might know.
She also speaks Mandarin.
She does. Many people do, almost everyone in China. Yeah, there are a few people in Queensland who speak Mandarin, not as many. This person's from New South Wales. So, it had nothing to do with it. In fact, we went through it with the lawyers, and there were 14 characters. There was one in particular, in fact, it wasn't that character, it was the Defence Minister, who was to have an affair with a Chinese Matahari in this particular book, and they wondered if there might be a bit of a problem with that. And it was the one point we had a sticking point with the lawyers. They said, we just can't get over this character, you've got to make some changes. we were sitting talking about it at a meeting and said, oh, look, you know, I don't know, what if we gave him a disability? What if he was in a wheelchair and the lawyer's face lit up and said, that would be fantastic. And then Steve said, he has a sex scene and it's hard enough for us to write sex scenes, but how do we try to work out how that might work? And then I said, well, what if he was missing a hand? He was a former union official. What if he was missing a hand? Fantastic. What if we gave him a hook for a hand? So that fictional character, that's the reason that hook is actually in the book.
The lawyers wrote the hook.
No. It was a consultative process. But it's been a fascinating. It's been fascinating as it's come out. People have imagined that they see themselves in this book, or someone who might be a lot like themselves in the book. Some of the politicians have commented. One of them said to Steve Lewis, "My friends tell me I'm in your book." No, it's all fiction.
Chris, surely you must draw from things that cross your desk on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, there are certain things that you can't write about in politics, or we don't write about much in politics, and one of them obviously is that there is a little bit of sex that goes on in Canberra.
Okay, you don't have to write about it, but you can share it with us.
There are several sex scenes, as you have pointed out to me in the book. There are 2 sex scenes in the book. People ask, because there were 2 of us who wrote the sex scenes. I like to say, well, we both had a crack. If you're reading it, mine is the tasteful one. If you don't like either of them, both of them were Steve.
There is one character in there that I know reviewers have pretty much said that we know that this book is pure fiction, or I think the review actually said the book is all fact except for that character who's plainly ridiculous.
That's right.
Tell us about that character.
In the book, there's a cross-dressing security analyst who works in the Defence Signals Directorate. If you ever go to Canberra and you see Russell, which is where all the defence is, there's one building that was particularly ominous. It's got this high fence around it, and that's where the Defence Signals Directorate is in Canberra, and that's the listening part. So Australia listens to the rest of the world, and particularly this region from there. So it's one of the highest security buildings in Canberra. We have a character in the book who is a security analyst who works in there, who is a cross-dresser called Ben Gordon, or he's got another name obviously, which I've just forgotten. Stephanie.
And Stephanie incidentally loves the book.
Yeah. So there is actually. So we had someone who wrote a review saying, look, this person is that person, this person is that person, but it could not possibly be this person is a security analyst who's a cross-dresser. Well, in fact, there is. And so that character is based on a real-life character.
Are there other characters in the book based on real-life characters?
I just think that you can get wrapped around the wheel of these things. It's all fiction and you should enjoy it as such.
Without pushing too hard, there is a second book that you've been contracted to write, and I know that there's also a federal election campaign that's kind of gotten away with writing time. Who's going to win in the second book?
In the election, or in the fictional election campaign? Well, I'd like you to think of this book a lot like Wayne Swan's forecasts. Like, if I was to make a forecast now, it might not necessarily come true, but I would claim afterwards that it was accurate at the time on publication. So, now look, it's pretty hard to see at the moment, given everything that's happened in federal politics over the last 6 years, that the Labor Party would win it from here. Something spectacular would have to happen. I asked actually a minister, I said, well, what could possibly turn around for the Labor Party? The answer was the Labor minister. And he thought for a moment, he said to me, well, if the Martians were to invade, and we did a particularly good job of defending Earth, that might just swing it around.
Does that make this a good fictional story, do you think?
Yeah, that was probably a bit of a stretch. But I don't, look, at this stage it's hard to see how there's any other result in the election, and the question will be how far, but you never give these things away. I was there in 1993 when everyone gave it away and thought John Hughes was going to win, and so did he, and he lost.
I might just take it to Nick Place from there, if we can just pass up the microphone. Oh, he's got one. Sorry, you can share. Nick's worked in senior editorial and writing positions within newspapers, magazines, television, radio and the internet. He's pretty much the multimedia guru. His first book in 2003 was a fantasy comedy novel for pre-teens, The Gazillion Wish, which was soon followed by Thanks a Gazillion, The OK Team and The OK Team 2 Better Than OK. He's also co-edited a non-fiction book, 50 Years of Australian TV, and Nick's first adult novel, roll with it was published this year, and it's the first in a crime series following the travails of Victorian Police Sergeant Tony Rocket Labour. By perhaps no coincidence, Nick is also a former police reporter, so I was kind of curious to find out whether any of the stories that crossed your desk as a police reporter made it into the fictional story.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I was quite young when I covered police rounds. It was a long time ago. I was kind of 19 years old doing 2 a.m. police rounds for the Herald, before the Herald Sun, which shows you how long ago it was. And I used to do the graveyard shift, which was 2 a.m. till 10 a.m., which basically meant you covered murders, fatal car accidents, and occasionally kind of fire for light relief. So I saw some pretty intense stuff while I was there, and I kind of tucked it away and sort of always had it there. So I guess in the book, yeah, when there's kind of a scene at night with big fluorescent lights and crime tape and all that sort of thing, it's pretty authentic to what goes on. It's funny, I mean, yeah, I'd actually created this character, Labour, and I'd been writing him for quite a while, and then it kind of freaked me out because I met him. I met the real one.
How did you meet the real one?
Well, a guy who wanted a brochure. I have a real job, which is this company called Media Giants, which kind of does online content and other things, and someone wanted a... Actually, it was great. I got a call from a friend who said, look, some friends of mine need a brochure. They're about to go to a Hong Kong arms fair because they have a ballistics testing company. And this arms fair kind of has tanks and missiles and things, and they want to kind of promote that they're a place to test out ballistics against going to America. It's cheaper in Australia. I don't know if you can help them. I don't know how much money they've got. I said, don't worry about the money, I'm in. This sounds too interesting not to get involved in. So I then found myself sitting across the table at a cafe with this guy, and we got talking. I said, how do you get into having a ballistics testing company? And he said, well, I used to be SOG cop, and so, you know, if you're going to rely on that stuff to save your life, you want to know it works. So we started testing it ourselves. And then once we were testing things, other friends said, can you test this for me? And suddenly we had a company. So I said, well, you know, I've got this character who's potentially SOG or major crime. I haven't decided yet, but I'm writing this thing, and he is unfortunate enough to shoot a guy, and the politicians get involved, and he gets dragged out of major crime and put into kind of, you know, a different role, a much lesser role. And this guy said, yeah, that happened to me. And I said, really? And it turns out this guy had shot a guy, you know, 8 times and had been dragged off to the police academy in Glen Waverley while the politicians got involved. And I started running scenes past him, saying when he turns up at his new job, the chief cop goes, look, I know you hate the world, I know you don't want to be here, just clock in, clock off, just stay out of the kids' ways, there's some good kids here. He said, yeah, almost word for word. So I was reasonably freaked out. So I sort of said to him, you've been in my head for like 10 years and now I'm sitting across the table from you. And he said, which is where it got golden, so if I tell you the real stories, could you replace the stuff you've written with the real stories? And I said, yes. Yes, I could do that. And so I sat down with him and his old SOG partner, and they told me these hair-curling stories about when they were in the force, and I used a lot of them in the book. And in fact, a lot of them I didn't use in the book just because they're too ridiculous. The thing of fact versus fiction. The things I didn't use, you just wouldn't believe. They literally ran over a suspect they were heading out to chase. They literally were on their way to a house where they'd heard a very bad guy was waiting. He'd heard the cops were on their way and had jumped the fence and started running. And they literally, while arguing about the best way to get to the house between themselves, you've got to take the next left. No, it's the next left after that. They literally got out of the car, looked down, looked at their thing and went, yeah, we got him.
So Nick, that was the first of 2 books at least, possibly a series, according to your publisher. Is that going to appear in the next book?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few stories I held back like that one that maybe in 2nd book or 3rd book I can get away with because my audience will go, okay, we understand what you're doing here, we'll go with it. But there was, you know, it was funny, the stuff that they actually told me, I wouldn't have been able to come up with. Like the fact that, you know, my guy kills the guy he shoots. But the real guy didn't kill him. He shot him 8 times. The guy lost an arm, lost a kidney, lost a few other body parts. And, you know, I said, so what, he's out of jail now? And he said, yeah, we have coffee occasionally. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah, because I just want to keep an eye on him. I just want to check. He was out to get me when he got out of jail. I talked him out of that by pointing out I was shooting back when I shot him. And basically now we just go to have coffee and I just check in on him. And, you know, I wouldn't have written that naturally. It wouldn't have occurred to me. One more was that one of the guys told me that, you know, he actually saw a guy get shot sort of repeatedly, and unlike Hollywood where they get thrown backwards through a wall and all that, this guy didn't move to the point that he thought his colleague had missed him from point blank. But in fact he hadn't. It's just that if you actually do the forensics and look at it all, bullets don't really move a body around very much. It really has to be an elephant gun bullet to knock someone around. And I didn't know that either. And so talking to these guys, I actually got some weird authenticity into the book that I otherwise wouldn't have got. I say too, I'm not an expert on all that stuff. I'm firmly from the rule of thumb of if you're writing fiction, it's fiction. I don't need to be forensic. I don't need to be dead accurate. It's fiction. As long as it's a good story, I don't really care. So it was kind of fun that you know, they gave me these crazy details.
Is it more important to you, do you think, that they actually read it and register it as real than it would be to, say, a regular audience member?
You know, I think the nicest thing that's come from the police community who've read it, like those guys and their friends and other people involved in that world, even police roundsmen, mates of mine, is I got the humour right. There's a very definite humour amongst the police. Journos share it as well, so most of us sitting up here would know that humour. But there's very black humour. You actually know it's a bad crime scene if no one's joking. You know, there's certain crime scenes like the death of a child or something where no one jokes. And that's when you know it's a bad one. If it's just a routine fatal, you know, it's a weird world, the police world. And so one of the nicest things I heard was actually that I got the humour right, that the kind of one-liners and the poker face just put-downs and just the kind of very inappropriate humour that runs strongly through the book, that's the nicest compliment I got. It was actually not the forensic detail and all that, but just that the cops went, you got it right, you got the humour right that we have amongst ourselves.
I think the next question, and this is something Nick and I talked about recently, and we won't go into details, but we talked about, you talk about the fact that you actually run a company that provides content, you have a day job. Most of the authors here actually have day jobs, a couple of them are doing it on their own. I think most people probably assume that, you know, it's a fairly glamorous industry, there's a, sorry, you know, Liam, are you doing something inappropriate over my shoulder? You know, this doubles as a donkey. We have talked about the fact that actually authors probably aren't living the glamorous lives that we imagine. For those who don't know, it took nearly 20 years to roll with it, is that right? From head to publication?
Yeah. I wasn't good enough to write it when I started it, so...
Tell me about the process of getting it out, and I think probably we'd be curious to know what your hourly rate ended up being.
Well, yeah, I guess, look, books are an interesting thing because I think, my theory is that people who write novels are kind of storytellers, and you have to kind of do it. We were talking about that earlier, saying you just have to do it. You have to tell stories. It's what you do. Even the whole time I was a journo, and even for all the time I haven't been a journo, I've done a whole bunch of other things. You know, I just had this thing of wanting to write fiction, wanting to write novels. You know, the greatest thing in my life is when I get an original novel written by me. You create it out of thin air. It's beautiful. But yeah, roll with it. It's taken 20 years off and on, or more. It's I started writing when I was in my mid-20s, and I just wasn't a good enough writer to write what I wanted to write. And so I had to step away from it for a long time, came back a few times, had a couple of kids which got in the way, stuff like that.
And then you started writing fiction for them.
Yeah, then I wrote some kids' books, which I really wanted to just write the end of a book, and I managed to do that, and I wrote 4 of those, and found out that actually writing with humour was kind of my thing. The role with it was very serious when I started it, so I put humour in, and you know, it's just been this evolution over met that guy, evolution over a long time. So yeah, I mean, it's not 20 years of sitting there every day writing, but it's been a long process. It probably took me, you know, my theory is for me to write a novel takes probably 5 or 6 months of solid work once I've got all my ideas right, and that process to get the ideas right can take a lot longer than that. So yeah, the hourly rate, not good. You know, I've got 5 books out now, and I think I worked out recently that, you know, I would have struggled to pay my mobile phone bill off those books in 10 years. So, you know, you don't do it for the money, but you always have this kind of puncher's chance that a film will get made or somehow you'll make money out of it. But I don't know, I can't talk for everyone else here, but I think if you wrote it thinking I'm going to make money out of this book, or you know, I'm going to pay my mobile phone bill off this manuscript, I think you're lost already. You don't really do it for that reason.
I think the segue probably leads into Kate Forster, who's sitting beside me. Kate's a trained actor and jazz singer who went on to run her family's advertising business and then turned her hand to fiction in 2010 after suffering crippling depression, and was basically ordered by her psychiatrist to find an alternative to the family life that she had and the work life that she had, both of which were, you know, probably all-consuming. She found almost immediate success, and she released 4 books through 3 publishers in the past 2 years. Her first novel, The Perfect Location, was published in January 2012 in Australia and the UK, and it quickly became a bestseller in the UK and has subsequently been optioned by one of Hollywood's leading producers. More on that, possibly invite Kate back. Her second novel, it's also subsequently, the first one subsequently been picked up in other European markets, as they do. Second adult novel published here is Seduction, and published in the UK as The Perfect Retreat. Was released in Australia this year and the UK. And then it rose to number 2 on the best-selling paperbacks list and chalked up a whopping 100,000 sales in the UK a couple of weeks ago. So
Lots of adults in the UK.
Yes, lots of adults in the UK. Kate's also published 2 young adult books so far for the Smitten series, and has 2 new young adult books coming out soon. She's also written and delivered the manuscript for her 3rd adult novel, which she's now editing. And she's now also writing 1 or 2. I lose track because she's churning them out so quickly. 2 young adults. Kate actually works 12-hour days, 7 days a week writing. This is her life, and it keeps her out of her depression, effectively. It's changed things. It pays it only just, as it happens, but yes. First of all, Kate, congratulations. And can you please tell us the story of how you came to write beyond what I've just said?
Well, I'll give you the true version, but it stays in the cone of silence. I read a book similar to what I write commercial fiction, and I read a book, and I was very depressed, and I don't know if anyone has ever dealt with depression or anxiety, but you can't actually read, you can't concentrate. Anyway, sick, go to the doctor, get, you know, slightly better, but still doing nothing with my day, and I can't do my job anymore, which is, and I have been my job, and I was very good at my job, and it's, you know, I watched the entire series of the Gilmore Girls. I mean, if that's not going to make you depressed, I don't know. But anyway, so me and Lorelei were just hanging out, and then it was bad.
I should add that Kate at the same time had a husband and 2 children who were in the room who were going through this with her, so
watching
that's probably not a great thing.
Oh yeah, there was Paris.
Paris.
Yes. Anyway. So I read a book. I read a book like I write now, and it had the worst ending. And I thought, this is the book that, coming out of depression, that I commit to. I read. It's a big, thick one, English author, and the ending was so bad that I threw the book in a dramatic moment. Too much Gilmore Girls. I threw the book across the room, and I thought, I can do better than that. Hubris, huh? So then I started writing, and I didn't think I'm going to write and be an author. I just thought I'm going to write and stop myself from, you know, popping my own clogs. So instead I sent it to 2 girlfriends who kept saying, send me more, and I finished 100,000 words in about 8 weeks. And my psychiatrist said, well, you better do something with it. And I said, don't be stupid. And I did, and I sent it to an agent, and I said, hi, I'm Kate, I've written this book. If it's shit, just pretend that I never sent it, and we will never talk about it. But if it's all right, here's my number. And then I just let it lie, and you know, she came back and said, right, send me the rest, and then suddenly I was off, and I had a new career, and see, it's exciting. And yeah, so that's it, that's how I did it.
And you've obviously branched into writing the young adult fiction as well. Is that, since we're talking about fact and fiction here, you have 2 kids who are in the room, one of whom presumably is in your target demographic.
Right in there.
Yeah, are there any similarities with your life, with your young adult fiction? How do you draw?
Yeah. I write young adult romance, so from 14 to 21. And it's like my
Are any of
books.
Tansy's relationships in there?
Yeah, Tansy's friends, some of them are named after them. There are real stories that I hear from her. She's like the John Michael Howson of school. She just gives me all the gossip from the Sandringham train line. And so she's very helpful. She'll also tell me if I've put a particular pair of shoes in that are lame. So, Mum, you would never wear those. So, I'm very grateful.
And there is, on a more serious note, your next young adult fiction book does actually draw from your struggle with depression, your struggle with mental illness, and also witnessing things around you. Can you tell us a little about that? It's more of a literary style, I believe.
Yeah, it's completely different to my other books. That's why it's really hard to write. I can maybe write 1,000 words a day on a good day, but then
how does that compare with what you normally do?
Oh, I'll write maybe 5,000 words a day on an average day. So my next book is a book about a young girl who has tried to kill herself. And it's about her recovery from that, and I think that more teenagers need books that have some hope, and they need more characters that aren't pining after a vampire, and they need to be able to see that illness can happen, and that life, there's no such thing as fair, and that you can try and find hope in the smallest of ways. And so it's funny and it's raw, and she spends time in a psychiatric hospital, and she self-harms, and she's difficult, and she's an unreliable narrator, but she is like most of those teen girls who are out there at the moment.
Is that confronting for you to obviously write it, but also see it, because you're immersing yourself a little in that world?
Yeah, it is. It's a really scary, horrible world if you're in there. And I've spent some time. A friend of ours works at a youth psychiatric hospital in Melbourne called Origin, and he's a psychiatrist. He specialises in self-harm. So I spent some time talking to him. And it's intense, and you need to be talking to your kids about it. And if you've got teenage daughters or granddaughters or whatever, you need to say there is not a problem in the world that we can't solve together. Don't ever make any decisions without, particularly about ending your life. Come and talk, and they will. Some of them will, hopefully.
On a lighter note, your first book, Perfect Location, actually. The lead characters are well-known actors who come together on a location in Italy to make a film. I felt like I was recognising some of those characters when I was
reading
the book.
Did you see yourself in them?
Did you draw anything from real life?
Yes, I drew a lot.
The gorgeous actor, for example, who lives at Lake Como, but is secretly gay, even though he's always photographed with women.
Clooney's not gay.
Kate loves Gossip Man.
I was writing about Kevin Rudd, actually.
Yes. All of my books, except for the teen ones, are based on. So my recent one, Seduction, is based on a Hollywood star. I have an agent. I have a manager in Los Angeles, so I hear these fantastic stories that don't kind of end up in the back pages of a Woman's Day, and they're salacious and they're great, and
you use them.
And I use them.
So when we read your fiction, how much is fact, Kate?
I would say that 80% of those stories in there and some of those acts are true.
Oh, well, that's a lot more than Chris admits to. Although
That's because he's got a lawyer.
They don't care about me.
He's got a lawyer, she's got an agent.
We might pass along to Anne. Anne's a former journalist and feature writer and a former colleague of mine at The Age. She's co-authored 3 memoirs, and so I'm particularly interested to find out how much fact and fiction is in a memoir, and also, in fact, what co-authoring means. Her most recent book was Dr. Hugh, A Life with Animals, about Victorian vet Dr. Hugh Worth, which was published last year. And actually, the two came out fairly close together, Forged with Flames, which tells the story of Ash Wednesday survivor Anne Fogarty. It's a completely inspirational story, basically, about a woman who went through an awful amount to have survived Ash Wednesday and has continued to have various battles and has won them all. Anne also co-wrote Shadow of a Girl, published in 1995, which was about a woman with anorexia. So she knows something of teens with mental illness as well, and has also contributed words and photos to Through Other Eyes, which documents the international work of the Fred Hollows Foundation, which also came out not that long ago. And I think the thing that I'm particularly interested in, first of all, what does co-author mean? You and I know, because we're friends, that you spent an awful lot of time with Hugh Worth writing that memoir. What does co-author mean? What is your role? What is Hugh's role? How do you become co-authors in that situation?
Okay, well,
speaking to hold it up close.
Well, they were three very different books, but co-author's a bit different to being like a ghostwriter because you get a joint byline.
Hold it a bit closer.
Oh, sorry. So the sorry,
what role did what was your role and what was Hugh's role in this in this instance? How did it actually work? Because I know it was a long process.
Well, how it all came about was that they were two quite different, Anne's one and Hugh's one were quite different books. But Hugh's one, I approached him, I heard him on radio one day, because on his Saturday morning show, and he was talking about when he was a vet at the Royal Melbourne Show, and he was called in to tell whether there's a bit of doubt about this prize-winning champion exhibit chicken. Which was a black rooster, but someone thought that maybe it had been dyed.
A died chicken as opposed to a dead chicken.
Sorry, and so Hugh tipped a bit of methylated spirits on its wings, and sure enough, it dripped black. Was actually a white chicken.
Fraud in the chicken world.
Actually, any duck shooters here? Anyhow, so I heard that anecdote, and the presenter said, "Oh, Hugh, you must write your memoirs." And he said, "If only I had someone to do it." So I rang up his producer and we started working on that. So I would go around to Hugh's and taped him. And Hugh is not, he doesn't have trouble with talking. So he would be off and I'd be sort of taping. So, but with Anne's book, she had already, they were different publishers, she had already submitted a manuscript, but it was very much her internal feelings. There wasn't any physical description, or the other characters in it were pretty sketchy. So I was asked to work with Anne and to sort of flesh it out. So as a journalist, I could ask her questions and fill in bits for that.
How do you actually do Anne in particular, but also with Dr. Hugh? Hugh's a well-known media identity who'd already written books of his own.
Yeah.
How do you actually go asking them personal questions, really intimate things, for the purposes of developing a decent memoir, something that's actually substantial enough to warrant a whole book?
Well, you had no trouble with asking him questions. Anne was a bit trickier. She's she's quite a shy person. And because she'd been really traumatised in the fires, I had to tread very carefully. I didn't want to get her to recount all of that again. I mean, I did, but some bits I just hurried her through because she was so still upset by it.
And in that situation, obviously you're relying on their memory. Both of them are probably in their 60s talking about things that had happened in their childhood. I'm in my 40s and I struggle to remember my childhood, but a memoir is technically fact. How much embellishment do you allow? Do you do fact-checking? How does that work? Do you just rely on a memory?
You do until sort of with memoir, it's a bit different to a straight autobiographical book. So there's a lot more musings and opinion and sort of reflections on things. But there will be facts that you can check and dates and times and that sort of thing.
How much of that happens?
Check, a lot. Often when, it's like in journalism, if there's any alarm bells that ring, you sort of check.
Did you have lawyers too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. They do. But before then, the editors will look at a book like that and ask about things too. They're pretty cautious too.
I guess the other thing that I'm curious about, for the reasons of memoir, and I'll ask William about this in a minute too, other people have a different reality to the person that has the memory.
Yeah.
Obviously you're asking Hugh or Anne about their memories of an occasion to write the memoir. How did you deal with the fact that other people might perceive their memories differently? Is there a way that you deal with that?
Well, ultimately, it's their book. So if people have different memories, you go with their ones. But quite often, I talk to a lot of other people about both books, and you could feed it into it and remind people. But then there will be a point at which they have different memories, and you go with theirs.
Okay, just one more point on what you just said. Ultimately, it's their book. How do you feel as someone who's given years of your life writing their book, having it as their book, not as your book?
I think it's the deal the whole way along. So that's
Beware it.
Yeah, beware it. And you work with them quite intensively, but then in the end you step back. It's their story.
I think Nick, who's beside you, has had a ghostwriting experience in the past, and for those who don't know, ghostwriting is where you don't even get a byline. Someone else gets the byline. Can you just tell us about that, Nick, how that works?
Yeah, I had a motivational speaker who decided it would be great at his motivational speeches if he had a book. Awesome, according to him. So I worked for a long time with him to pull this book together, and it was actually kind of supposed to be the same as that, like a sort of coach thing, but it ended up being kind of his byline on it. But it was okay. But it was just, I guess my learning out of that was that, I kind of wrote the whole book from talking to him and tapes and all that sort of thing, and it took months and months and months. And I guess, look, maybe I'm just more, in fact I know I'm more selfish than Anne. I think I just thought if I'm going to spend that many months on a book, it's going to be one of my novels. Like, it's so time intensive to write a book, whether it's non-fiction or fiction or whatever sort of book you want to write. A book is so much work that I just really decided if I'm going to put in those sorts of hours, it's going to be on one of the things that I really care deeply about. I mean, really that was a money job for me. To do a ghostwriting job was a Media Giants thing. It was just, yeah, we've never done ghostwriting, we'll give that a go. And I didn't care about it ultimately.
You wouldn't do it again?
No, not at all, because at that sort of time, I'm going to put into a novel. Even if the novel tanks, it's my novel. And if it crashes or burns, well, at least it's something I'm passionate about and it's from the soul. So yeah, it was a good learning experience for me.
Might move on to William. And I should just add on that note too, Anne does have a novel. It doesn't yet have a publisher. It's still in its final draft, so we might see that at some stage down the track.
And a horse book.
And another book that's actually just been delivered to about horses and various horse stories for the horse people among you, including some of them in East Gippsland. We have famous horses. William, you probably know because he's, been here before. There's a sandwich in the cafe named the McGuinness after William. He's delighted readers for years with his memoirs, novels and insights into Australian life. Is that for me or for you?
I've got a bowling hat collection here today, so it's the Irish Catholic.
He's delighted. Sorry, he cracks me up and he's deliberately doing this. Just bear with us. His first book was A Man's Got to Have a Hobby in 2006. He's since written several books, adding That'd Be Right, Cricket Kings, The Laughing Clowns, The Making of Modern Australia, and my personal favourite, Worst Things Happen at Sea, a memoir that he co-wrote with his wife Sarah Watt. William's won numerous accolades, both for his writing and as an actor. I've also noticed that he hasn't listed it on his official CV, but he's written quite a few episodes of popular Australian TV dramas,
some of which he's also appeared, and some of which actually caused a little bit of friction with his castmates after he asked them to do and say silly things.
Yeah, it was Blue Heelers and I left, and I got Martin Sachs is a nice guy. He's one of my best mates, but he had to solve a crime through tongue twisters. You can't, so that was fun. John Wood had to eat a lot of tarts, donuts. Wasn't there no vanilla slices? And the people I didn't like, I made them sound like they were reading the Channel 10 news. It was all there's a penny power parade on Penhope Street. And there was a lot of alliteration. It was all right though.
Anyway, William, you're a well-established actor by the time you started to write. Can you please tell us how you moved into it?
I left, no, I'd gone back. Blue Heelers was this TV show that was on about, wasn't that 20 years ago? It's not more.
Getting there, 15.
And I left after about three and a half years, and then in the great Australian tradition where they want to, rejuvenate a television series, they blow up where it's set and they kill half the cast. And one of the guys didn't want to die. He didn't mind leaving, but he didn't want to die. And he said, I don't want to die. I was told this by Marty. I said, fuck mate, it's a TV show, he's not dead. I don't want to die. And so how he left the show was, he had this big dramatic line after the station was blown up and one of my other friends died. She couldn't care. He said, I'm going over to Perth to set up a Jim's Mowing franchise. Now, there's nothing against Jim's Mowing, but I thought, man, he's like a bomb at Jim's Mowing. I think that's like some sort of fucking like, I don't know, there's some sort of, sedative Valhalla, isn't it? But and then they got me back for 4 weeks, and then the A. You asked me. She asked me to write a story about it, and I wrote the story. And then someone from my publisher rang up, and she said, "Hello, my name's Bernadette Fairley. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" Oh, fuck off, Eric. And I thought it was all my friends being stupid. Oh, it's all right. We're all friends here. We're all adults. Old and young.
Can I just say I didn't invite him?
And when I realised it wasn't one of my friends, I spent about 40 minutes apologising to her. And then she said, "You know, I want to write a book," and I went, "Oh yeah." So I wrote a book. So there's no accounting for taste.
You've been pumping them out ever since, William, and I have to say...
Been pumping them out. Very regular.
Very regular you are. You've written fact and fiction since then.
Yep.
How do you actually go between the two, and how much fact is there in your fiction and how much fiction is there in your fact?
Oh well, it's a bit like McDonald's, isn't it? You know? No, I mean,
The first book. Let's start with the
what's
first
the
book.
first book? What was that one?
A man's got to have a hobby.
That was like, I mean, you embellish a few things. It's like a story that's told, handed down from families. So it's what actually happened. Like I had an Uncle Reg, who was a great bloke. Well, my father used to say this great thing about, for Christ's sake, don't give Reg pots, give him ponies, because if he has pots, he'll get pissed quick and he'll start crying about the tiger in Malaya. Now, I never knew what that meant. My mum said, when she was sort of very sick, she said, oh, it's something about the Malayan emergency. The only thing I can remember with Uncle Reg was he said, we had a barbecue once, and he said, do you want to see my Elvis impersonation? And I said, sure, Uncle Reg. And he was sitting on a stool and went, oh, what's going on? And he goes, Elvis died on the dunny, you know, and that was his Elvis impersonation. So what do you have to do? Thank you very much. The other thing about Uncle Reg, he had this great big Roman nose, and he was having a pony, he'd bubble into it, and he goes, there's a cappuccino for you. Oh my damn Uncle Reg, God love him.
For those who haven't had the privilege of reading William's books, William comes from a place called Redcliffe up in Queensland and writes heavily about that area, a lot about that area. Does anyone still speak to you up there?
Oh, yeah, it's all right.
How much of with the fictional work, and we can move on to some of the other books. I know, for example, Sarah, who your wife was a close friend of mine, and she was very unhappy when Cricket Kings came out.
Because I wrote about this guy who was a building inspector, and we did, it's like anything, you have about 1 million renovations in the house. And then this guy came in and he had, he's just a troglodyte from a really dysfunctional council. And, you can't have that, you can't have this, you can't live with that, you can live with that, but you can only live with that, that's 5 millimetres too long. I said, what? He He said, that's not this renovation that we're going to have, there's going to be $5 million in that. I said, mate, what? You got a bit of carpet, I can remember that. So Sarah just went crazy because this carpet, but I stuck it in a book, this Cricket Kings book, which is, that was the novel, that was the...
That was the first
and then
novel.
about 3 or 4 years later, we were doing another renovation and he came back and Sarah was always saying, you got any mind, you idiot, you know, this guy's going to sue. He won't sue. He came back and he said, that's okay. He got out this copy of Cricket Kings and says, can you sign that page for my piece? He told this great story. I said, what have you been doing, Trev? He goes, I went to Germany on a holiday with Mrs. my mother. I said, what was it like? It was absolutely terrible. My mother was terrible. The Germans, sometimes I think it wouldn't be better if they won the war. They know how to do things. That's a building inspector. Anyway.
The other thing you wrote a fantastic memoir, Worst Things Happen at Sea, with Sarah. How did that come about, and was the process any different? It's the only book that you've actually co-written with someone. Was that different?
Oh, well, that was because I had to deliver a novel, and then I was off doing stuff. Well, she wasn't very well, but then she decided. She said, "Well, why don't you write something about don't make it a novel, write about a family, and there's like a story of a family." And I know, and then she thought, well, she'd like to write it. And that's why it's a good book, because what she wrote over was beautiful. It was his usual crap from me, but her stuff was great. I really think.
Do you take liberties when you write memoir? How
a
much
little
is
bit,
not
yeah.
true?
Oh, there's always. It's like telling a joke. You don't totally. But look, I went. There's a thing in. What was that one I wrote? That'd Be Right. I wrote about when John Howard went to Williamstown to open the ship. One of the frigates was being built there. It was a great day, and so many. I mean, if you just watch the news, John Howard, the Prime Minister, went to Williamstown. Chris was probably doing it. John Howard, his transsexual get up. He said in the open, and a lot of people were there, and it was great. So that's the truth. The fact of the matter is, we went there, and it was fantastic. It was big. You don't see big things anymore, being made, and it was great. It was a beautiful day, and there was a band playing. Then John Howard got there. The band that was playing decided to play as he got out of the car. They started playing the theme to the Pink Panther. And to his credit, I mean, I didn't pay for him, but I did all right out of him. But he got up and he went, ah! And he laughed. And then he was doing like there's a guy doing a John Howard impression. And he was having a whale of a time. And he was just in the middle of everybody, and there was all these kids running up to him because he's the Prime Minister. And he had 2 security guys who looked like, oh yeah, we got the security. So we'll dress up as those guys from the Washington movies. So they're wearing Macintoshes and they were talking to their lapels like that. And it was like a beautiful day. And I'm looking at it and I remind me, the last time I heard the Pink Panther theme being played when I was watching this is when I was at the Blue Nurses Home was being opened up the road at home. And I always remember when it was being played that Ivan, this guy that was a tough, used to do trick drives with the jetty, who my mum said he's not quite right, don't worry about him. He was going to get this, no, lucky well, they have young Ivan probably, he's probably police person, it's probably going to be a bit of the old jiu-jitsu. I remember him sort of going, and he broke his wrist. He didn't break the fingers. And he was going, hey, you did that well. And this old lady from the tea thing came over from the Red Cross saying, come on, I've got some iodine for that. And that was the same thing that was being played when John Howard was waving. He was like a John Howard impersonator. And then one of the guys he was with was really worried about him because he sort of, there was all these kids, it was like epidemic, it was crazy. And then the other guy, he just got bored. And he went, oh, for fuck's sake. He's standing there in his Macintosh. And then I had my daughter, about a week before, we'd gone up to Ballarat where they had the Avenue of Prime Ministers, and I got Sarah to try and video me jumping over the Prime Ministers. And I ended up getting caught on Howard. So I held up Stella saying, that man is the Prime Minister of Australia. And she goes, that man you sat on his face. The guy that was bored turned around and he went, mate, you are keen. I just thought, what a great country. What a fantastic place to live.
One of the things that when I first started thinking about writing a book about Canberra was lots of really funny things actually happened you never seen. I was working for the Canberra Times back in 1990. Keating was still treasurer, and we did something unforgivable. The chief of staff decided that everyone needed to know that the treasurer had two houses, one in Canberra and one in Sydney. So we published a picture on the front page of the two houses. One in Canberra, we published the street name on the front page, and you could clearly in the picture see the number of the house. And even in those days, it was a terrible breach of security. I'll have to edit a bit. So the next day, at 9 o'clock in the morning, in those days you could shoot a cannon and never hit anyone in the newsroom at that time, except for one person, Graham Downey, who was blind. And he used to come in on the bus every morning. So he always came at the same time. He's tapping in his way in, and the phone's ringing on Chief of Staff's desk. He picks the phone up, and on the other end, there's Keating, and goes, "You effing pack of effing C's! You complete pack of effing C's! Do you know what you've done?" And Downey said, "What have we done? Have you seen the front page of the newspaper?" And Downey said, quite honestly, "No." "You effing, what do you do there?" "I'm a journalist." "Journalist, call yourself an effing journalist! What sort of effing stupid silly journalist hasn't seen the front page of his own newspaper this morning? Why haven't you seen it?" And Downey said, "I'm blind." And Kenny yelled, "Well, get me someone who can see!"
The last time I saw Chris in the flesh, not on the news, was when the Queen came out here the last time. There was this big do up in Parliament House. And I got an invite because I was the chair of the museum of the old Parliament House thing. And I said to Sarah, "Do you want to go?" She said, "I asked my mum." And I asked my mother-in-law. She said, "I haven't got a thing to wear." So I asked Stella, my daughter. She said, "Oh, I don't know, I got an exam." And I said, "Con, you want to go?" And, "Yeah!" So we went, and it was one of the funniest nights. I mean, I bumped into the David Smorgon, who was there, and my son and David Smorgon got into an argument at the Bulldogs. And David Smorgon said, "Son, I'm going in a couple of years, give me a break." And my son said, "I want a happy life!" That's when the Governor General came in, Clinton Price goes. But then, it got even crazier, because, the Queen comes and it's all this stuff, and I won't embarrass this I quite like him, he's a sort of very senior member in the coalition. Well, I'll try and do an impersonation of him. And the Queen came, Prime Minister was there, and Noel Tone was there, and the Duke of Edinburgh, they were walking up before they did the round of all the speeches. And we all looked over there, and you heard this. Tony Abbott was walking like this. Really mean Thunderbird. And I heard this guy, I really like it. "Jesus Christ, I don't know. Tony, he just looks like he's always fucking cross-country skiing." Very good with finance. And,
Chris, who is it?
Pretend he's not a transsexual. They made the speeches, it was all very good. Then, what's that Scottish guy, the senator? Bob Cameron guy?
I got that one.
And that David Gummerl was playing, he was beautiful. And I had a laugh with this I can't remember the National Party guy, he was a really nice bloke. And he turned around. He whispered after, he said, "Can you show some respect?" And this guy said, "You weren't even born here." And he goes, "Tannic Phil's feeling." And Prince Phil was, and then they had to walk around. And they were meeting everybody, and my son said, "I've got to go and say hello to her." So, "Well, good luck to your sons." And then he was next in line, and then Bob Brown came from nowhere. I'm not sorry, go man. He went up there, and he pushed aside. He got sort of basically hip and shouldered out of meeting the Queen by Bob Brown. And he went like, "Oh," like he was playing animal football. "Oh!" And they said, "That's why you never played Firth at Skivvies." He went, "Ah!" And then he got in the next in line, and then Julie Bishop pushed him out of the way. And he turned to me, he said, "I'll give her the Wookiee." And I went, "No!" And he does a fantastic Chewbacca impersonation. Queen, God love her, just went like that and walked on. It's cool, when my Missy went. So, but you know, and you know, what you would have had when that was reported was, you know, a lot of people sort of turning up and being very sombre and respectful, but it was a lot of fun. And the great quote was that Lane Caldicott, the guy from Channel 9? He was a great guy. He said, everything, the bar had closed down, and he came up to me, because I had a couple of beers with him, and he said, "You're thirsty?" I said, "No, mate, I've had enough." And he said, "Well, there's any free piss to be had. Peter Slipper will know where it is."
The ABC and SBS predominantly, filing from countries as diverse as Nigeria, Eritrea, Cuba, Germany, Russia, and of course Australia. For the past 12 years, she's been a senior journalist with ABC TV's The Australian Story. So for anyone that is a regular watcher, you are bound to have seen Belinda's work. She's won numerous Australian and international awards for it, and her first book, Every Parent's Nightmare, tells the devastating true story of a man's fight to save his son from a life sentence in a Bulgarian jail. And that story actually came from an Australian story that Belinda did quite a few years ago now. Can you tell us about that, Belinda?
Did. Well, I was in the edit suite at Australian Story, and we were putting together, the editor and I were putting together a story about a 3-year-old girl and her parents. The parents were struggling to find a cure for the 3-year-old's leukemia, and they were doing everything possible to do that, and ultimately the mother had another child, hoping that the stem cells would match this child in any way, that this would end up in a cure of some kind. Fortunately, the little girl is healthy and well, and everything. That story had a happy ending, and so that's terrific.
And this one?
This one less so. And so while I was trying to work with the editor, getting the right tone of traumatic music going through the pictures, and there's this beautiful little girl in front of us, and we're slowing down the pictures and shuffling them along. There's brr, brr, the phone rings. And it was a young woman of about 21 years old, and her name was Ash. And she said she got my number through a former a spy, an intelligence officer who'd helped me with the story. And she goes, she was really nervous. "My name's Ash, and my friend Jock, he's in trouble. He's in trouble in Bulgaria. He's been arrested." Pause. They've charged him with murder. Oh, suddenly I take my eyes off the pictures in front of me and listen a bit more intently. I go, well, that sounds terrible. Who can I talk to about it? Because she didn't seem to know much. And she says, well, his father is the only person who knows anything. And his name is Simon Polferman. He's a doctor. He's a pathologist. He lives in Newcastle. And I go, great. Have you got his number? No, she didn't have his number. And then she added, but he won't speak to you. He won't talk to any journalist. And immediately I was gripped to this story on a number of levels. Firstly, if no one will talk to you about a certain topic, obviously that person is the most deadly fascinating person in the universe. And Simon, for all that he ended up being a humble, totally honest, decent man, I have been fascinated, I think, by him and his extended family now for 5 years. The other part of the story that grabbed me was that a young man, a 21-year-old fellow from Sydney, was incarcerated in Bulgaria, and his parents, several days after Christmas, had received this terrible call that their child was in trouble on the other side of the world. At the same time, there was another set of parents on the other side of the world in Bulgaria whose 20-year-old son, a law student called Andre, had been stabbed, received a single stab wound after having a night out with mates, and he was dead. So I had 2 children, a girl coming up to the end of high school and a son just about at the end of high school. I'd been a backpacker, like Jock was, when I was 19. I'd worked with gypsies. I'd caused my parents no end of grief. I knew my children would be about to do the same thing, and so I stepped immediately into the shoes of both those sets of parents, and I wanted to know what happened. How was it that a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old got into the sort of scrap where one is facing the rest of his life in prison, he's going to be buried alive in prison, and the other was dead and buried?
Belinda, one of the things that we talked about this afternoon, and I think all of the authors this afternoon were curious as to your take on this case.
clearly the Australian media has actually played a role in some way in keeping Jock, through inaccurate reporting, in jail in Bulgaria. Bulgarian media has obviously done the same thing. You've spent a lot of time now going through court transcripts, speaking to Jock, speaking to his family, speaking to other witnesses in the case. What's your take on what actually happened that night? Because it's a bit confusing, I think, for those that have followed it.
It's confusing. It's only just become less confusing to me in the last part of writing this book, halfway through last year. But yes, over 5 years, my take on what happened in the early hours of the 28th of December 2007 has changed. I've gone through different backflips. I go in and out. Did he do it? Did he do it's maybe not the question. Jock, so what happened that night? Nobody disagrees with this. What happened that in the early hours was that a group of young Bulgarians, Andre, the dead boy, included among them, came out of a metro station on one side of a square. They'd been out drinking. Andre had a blood alcohol content of 0.29. His mate, who received a slash wound, had a blood alcohol content of 0.18. So it's fair to say they'd all been drinking a fair bit. They came out, they were chanting football slogans, they were all fans of a particular soccer team, they call it football there, and they were also singing a nationalistic Bulgarian song. And on the other side of the squares, the Australian, and he's with a Bulgarian he's been drinking with that night, and a British friend, a female, and they were trying to buy things at an all-night kiosk. They hear this loud noise, about 300 metres away, and the Bulgarian goes, let's get out of here, these could be soccer hooligans. So Jock and the other two ran away from the square, the group kept coming, and then at a certain point when they got up to the traffic lights, two of them, I think Andre being one of them, saw a bloke coming towards them, started to follow him, started to lunge at him, and then a call went out, mungo, which is a derogatory term for a gypsy, call went out, mungo, and suddenly all 15 or 20 of them raced across the square after two, and then ultimately one bloke who we can fairly well presume is a gypsy. Gypsies are a reviled group in Eastern Europe, in lots of parts of Europe, and then witnesses say the bloke was pushed to the ground and they started beating him up. At that point, Jock ran across the square and went to the assistance, he says, of the gypsy. Then when the attack turned on him, he pulled a pocket knife, absolutely fatal move on his part, a pocket knife out of his pocket and started waving it in the air. He thought that that would frighten the young men away, and perversely, I think, it had the reverse effect. They kept coming at him, and a bloody melee ensued, during which time I only, when I finally got access to CCTV footage, found during which time he tried to escape. He was hit in the head, knocked to the ground, tried to escape. The group ran after him, and
someone was stabbed.
And someone was stabbed. Yeah.
And in all of this, you've managed over 5 years, really, to reconstruct all of this. You've obviously had a Bulgarian interpreter. You've got access to the most incredible array of documents in what's obviously a difficult legal system. You've also managed to put yourself into the shoes of various family members of people that were not initially cooperating with you. How do you go about writing something that's clearly a fact book in that way? Like, it must have been very difficult. You also had a full-time day job, of course.
Well, I think there was a lot of information in the court documents because the family of the dead boy played such a huge role throughout the whole of the criminal trial. So I stepped inside their minds, both by watching them in court and by reading all this documentation. Then I had this wonderful young journalist who was my research assistant and translator, and she talked a lot to the mother of the dead young man particularly, and together with also going to see where they live, talking to friends of theirs. Even before I ever met her, I had a very strong sense of what she'd been through. I went to the cemetery, I saw where her son was buried, I'd seen endless television coverage of the funeral and of them, you know, the way they went through that tragedy. And I think I could step, as we do in Australian Story, I just stepped inside her shoes. What would a mother go through getting a call about 18 hours after her son had died, that the boy that was being talked about on the news wasn't just any old 20-year-old, that was her baby.
Yeah. I guess that's the next question too. You're obviously very experienced in it. Did your experience as a filmmaker assist you in writing this book?
Well, I've never written a book before this book, so that's hard to tell. But in documentary making, well, in Australian Story, we do spend an awful lot of time with people.
Really, though, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a reason to tell the story.
That's true. You find a narrative, or the narrative finds you, and away you go. I think I told this story through the eyes of some of the witnesses, the parents of the dead boy and the father of Jock, and of course through Jock's eyes, and that is an Australian story way of doing things.
Going back to the theme, when fact meets fiction, would you say there's any fiction in it? Is there any embellishment? It's obviously a true crime genre book. Is it completely true?
I had limited access to the family of the dead young man, so in about 2 sections I had to use imagination and creative license to bring alive a sense of them in their house. Because it had to be factually based, because there's only a limit to how much creative license you can take, I had to leave out all sorts of things that I can imagine they went through, like passing the place in the downtown city square where their son lay bleeding to death. I can imagine what they went through, but because I couldn't double check whether they actually maybe avoided that bit of the city square, maybe always went around it, never to go past it, I didn't write about that. So there's a small amount of creative license, but basically it came from what people told me, from extensive interviews with people.
I think on that note, there is just one more question I'd like to ask, and maybe the microphone can go to Chris for this one. This afternoon when we were talking about what we might discuss, there was quite a lot of conversation around sex scenes. Chris?
Speak to the professionals at that end.
I guess I just wanted to know, when you write a sex scene, does it come from imagination, or is it something
Well, no, I'm 52. I've got a reasonable memory. I can recall occasions when it happened. One of the things that became somewhat controversial, which I didn't understand, because you could say that, happily married for a long period of time, when I was, put it this way, back in the game, a gentleman referred to a woman's undergarments as panties. Apparently that's not in common usage anymore. I mean, like, who knew? But,
Kate told Chris this afternoon that if she gets to the word panties in a book, she won't read the book any further.
More panties chapter coming shortly. In fact, I was just thinking as Belinda was talking, because Belinda did the Australian story on Malcolm Turnbull, and so you were asking about characters in the book. Did the story on Malcolm Turnbull. I did the news stories on Malcolm Turnbull as the Godwin Gretsch stuff was coming undone. Well,
where's he now?
Well,
he's in Painesville.
Somewhere in Belinda was actually you were downstairs in his office as we were doing the news stories, as this stuff started to come undone, and we did the story midday, police are on the way to this guy's house. It looks like he's got, and over the course of the next 2 days, it looks like he's got some links with the Liberal Party. Guess what? He has. And there may be, and so Linda rang me and said, would I be part of the Australian story as she did it, and I thought long and hard about it. Eventually I did it. The night that it went to air, I was actually in Sydney, and I thought, this has not gone well.
But we just have to paint a little bit more.
Yeah.
When, as the whole Gordon Gretsch thing came up,
That's his brother.
as it was coming as it was unravelling, and Chris was, and his colleagues were actually, shushing him on that, and we don't want to defame him. As they were finding out all the facts to do with it, I was in Malcolm Turnbull's office with his wife, who works in close partnership with him on everything. It's like you buy one, you get one free. And so they were reading the news releases, they were reading what ABC was watching, and they forgot that I was there with a camera filming them the whole time. And so one poor fellow who then was then sacked, was stumbling over a word. You know, it was a word like inconceivable or some sort of not so uncommon word. Was desperately scratching his head trying to think of what it meant, and that was all on tape. Turnbull's wife was trying to work out how someone might have written a fake... Concocted was the word, yeah. And she was trying to work out how you could fake an email. They were genuinely more than bemused by how this thing had come unstuck.
All right, so then the thing goes to where I'm in Sydney, and there might be a scene a little bit like this in the Marmalade Files. The show ends at 8:30. At 8:31, my phone rings and it's got Malcolm Turnbull written on it. And I thought, he doesn't want to talk to me now. He wants 10 minutes to calm down. So I press the little red button, and I get a text saying, call Malcolm now. So I waited about 10 minutes, and then I called him, and it went something like this. Chris, you complete effing moron. Your judgment is completely effed, and that will not be a matter of opinion. It will become a matter of fact that your judgment's effed. There's a whole lot of information about this guy. Like, I warned you we had more information about it. I wanted to get this stuff. It went for about 15 minutes, and he worked himself up into this fury, and then as he started to come down, he got depressed. He said, I don't know what to do. I want to get this stuff out there. I'm really not sure, you know. And then at the end of it, he said, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, I wouldn't ask me, Malcolm, because some people think my judgment's pretty fucked.
I think on that happy note, we might actually hand the microphone over to Duncan, because I'm fairly confident that other people might have questions of our illustrious panel, perhaps before they drink anymore.